Just wanted to jump in here real quick at the beginning of the video and say I apologize for the audio difference compared to how we normally do it. Apparently the microphone cable wasn't quite all the way plugged in. I did the best I could with the wind noise and stuff, so I do apologize for it, but let's jump into the video. Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more turkey patterning, and today we've got a rather interesting side-by-side or head-to-head test that may or may not serve a massive purpose, but it definitely is going to be fun to test and just see how far we've actually come. This is a very limited, little bit older school setup. We've got a very limited older shell and something that is quite a bit more newer and modern. So we're gonna put it all together and see just how much of a difference a modern shell can actually make from a setup that's as limited as this one actually is. So first off, we'll start with the setup we're running today, that being this little guy. This is my childhood turkey hunting gun. It's a New England Firearms Pardner SB1. It's also a youth model. The stock is actually shorter. It ends about here, and I added this slip-on recoil pad over top to make it a little bit longer for an adult. I also had it drilled and tapped recently and put a red dot on top so we don't have to jam our faces low down on the barrel since everything is so short. But it's a 410 single shot break action 22-inch barrel that's a fixed full choke, measures right at about 395, very typical range for a full choke 410. But obviously this setup is not the best thing out there when it comes to turkey hunting. It can do the job, but it is very limited. You have to know your ranges and you have to be selective about what shell you use and what shots you actually take. I have taken a bird with this a couple years ago with TSS, so it can do it, but the two shells that we're going to be running through it today, I think we're going to see a massive difference in capability. One that is kind of from my childhood era before TSS, and then a modern TSS load that's actually going to give us a little bit more capability out of a shotgun like this. So this is going to be pretty interesting. So as for our two shells that we're running today, head to head, I've got these two offerings, and we're going to start with these two particular shells, and I want to do a second part to this as well with a little different variation. But to start with, we've got 2.5-inch shells. When I was a kid 15 years ago, this is the softest stuff that we could get, is these 2.5-inch lead loads. These ones in particular are a Remington Game Load 410 2.5-inch half-ounce payload of lead 6s at about 1200 feet per second. We have pattern tested these from this gun and saw that it's a very extremely limited setup. No surprise there. It'll do the job, but you have to limit your range to really up close and personal. Then in the other corner, we've got a TSS 2.5-inch shell, those being some of the Viper ammunition 410 TSS loads. You can't get these anymore, I don't believe. This company has kind of gone out of business, it seems, but this is the only 2.5-inch TSS load I've got, although there is other companies that do produce them or will make you some if you want a 2.5-inch TSS load. But these ones are a 410 2.5-inch 11/16 payload of TSS 9.5s at about 1135. We know these are good patterning shells, but we've got kind of two opposites here. Old and limited, new and a little bit more capability. So we're going to put the two head to head and really get a good idea on what the true difference is between these two. So for today's test, we're going to shoot both of our shells at 30 yards side by side. When it comes to lead in a 410, especially a setup like this, 30 yards is about the realistic limit. I would not push it any farther than that, and even that is most of the time a little bit of a stretch. But I think that's going to be a good range for our TSS capability to really come into play. So putting these two side by side at 30 yards, we're really going to see a difference for sure. And these are just our starting point. 2.5-inch shells are not the best thing out there for 410. They're pretty limited. I do plan on doing this soon with a 3-inch version of this exact test as well and seeing the two side by side. But to start off with, let's get you guys a view of both of these targets and see what kind of 30-yard capability we have out of an old single shot fixed full choke Pardner with a lead 6 versus a TSS 9.5. I think there's going to be a rather large difference, but let's take our shots and really get an idea on how big that difference truly is. Okay, so quick look through our chrono numbers before we look at our targets. To start with, the Remington Lead 6 Game Loads, they have a box claim of 1200 and we saw 1264. Very typical. That's what we usually get from them, is mid 1200s. So looking good there. And the Viper 9.5 shot TSS has a box claim of 1135, but we saw 1025 from those. I don't think we've ever tested those through this short of a barrel, so they probably ran them through a 24 or 26, I would imagine. So now let's walk down to 30 and see what the difference really is between lead and TSS. All right, well, here are the two targets side by side. Both of these shots were taken at 30 yards, same exact distance. We have our lead 6s on the left and our TSS 9.5s on the right. And there is a big difference here between the two for sure. Both are dead turkeys, but one pattern is way more capable and probably way more reliable than the other. So we'll start over here on the left with our lead 6s, and those Remington Game Loads actually did surprisingly well. We have tested those before through that setup. We know they are very limited, but this might actually be one of the better patterns we've gotten from them. And this is 30 yards. We have 4 of them through the brain there, and another one definitely in the spine down there a little lower. So that bird is absolutely dead at 30 yards. However, you can see the clear lack of pellets. So again, I always have people that end up complaining about it, but this setup is still capable of killing a turkey. You just have to really know your limits. You have to be selective with your shot, you have to know your ranges, and know the capability of your pattern. Even though we see a dead bird on this shot, 30 yards is the limit, if not a little bit over the limit for most of the time when it comes to lead loads in that particular 410. Ideally, I would want to be closer to 20 yards and in. Then it would absolutely reliably kill a turkey. It doesn't matter if a lead 6 comes from a 410 or a 12 gauge shell, the physics are still the same. The pattern density is where it really matters, so you have to know your limitations. But it's a dead bird, and for what it is, that's not a terrible pattern overall. That would do the job, but extremely limited. However, now moving over to the right with our TSS 9.5 shot, little bit different story. We still absolutely have a dead bird. There is a couple up near the head and brain area and several more down the spine, although we definitely favored a touch left with that particular shot, which is interesting because that's a fixed choke gun. Both of these shells were shot at the same distance. I felt great about both of them, but that particular shot favored left, which is why you always zero with the shell that you are going to hunt with. But this is clearly a little bit more reliably capable of a pattern. You have a lot more shot through the core area there, although it's not overly tight like a dedicated turkey combo would be. We have a decently circular shape going on here. We definitely have our fair share of little stringy bits and stuff up there around the top as well. Nothing out of the normal or too surprising going on. But you can see how much more full that pattern is. If you're carrying pretty close to the same energy between these two and you're hitting the bird with more pellets with this, the bird is going to be dead just fine, and it's going to give you a little bit more trust in your pattern out to 30 yards. I still probably wouldn't push this a ton farther. You might be able to reach to 35 and still do the job decently reliably, but there's a big difference here between these two. Both would work, but if I'm picking between these, that TSS is clearly the better option. So let's pull both these targets down. I'll draw some circles and count some pellets, and we'll really get a good idea on the exact number difference between these two. All right, now our turkey targets are out of our way, and yep, we can really see the true difference between these two shells. Both of them being capable enough, but one being reliably capable and the other might not be. So again, we'll start over here on the left with our 6s, and we actually see a decent pattern here for what the shell and gun combo actually is. Within our 10-inch circle, we have 38 pellets, a decent little hot string of them there as well, but you can see it's not very covered in pellets. It's a little sparse for sure. Outside of that, with our 20-inch leeway circle, we have 39 additional pellets there, and you definitely start to pick up big voids throughout most of it there. So, I mean, it technically gives you a little bit of leeway, but that is a very extremely limited pattern. Close range, it's going to work, but I would not push my luck much farther than 25 yards, because even though this pattern looks good, you may take another shot or two, and it may be a little different story from one to the next. But for what it is, that's a decent pattern overall. That particular shell performed well for us. But moving over here to our TSS shell, and it's a completely different story. Within our 10-inch circle, you can see nice even coverage throughout there. A ton more pellets now. We have 97 compared to 38 with the lead 6s, and outside of that, within our 20-inch leeway circle, we have 117 compared to only 39 with our lead 6s. And throughout most of the pattern, at least what's inside of this 20-inch ring, is nice even coverage of shot. It's not overly tight necessarily, but that would certainly kill a bird at 30 yards reliably all day long. You center that up, gives you nice breathing room to work with, and that would be a phenomenal youth load. I really wish you could actually deal with Viper still. They've kind of stopped sending a bunch of their stuff out, it seems, unfortunately. So, a little bit unfortunate there. These were great shells, but kind of is what it is. However, we can clearly see the advantage that TSS gives us in these sub gauges. We know how limited that shotgun is. That's a fixed full choke that's not overly tight, and this is 30 yards. You can see the difference here. These are just 2.5-inch shells as well. Not the ideal combo. A 3-inch load is much better. Even a 7.5 shot in lead is a better option than 6s are. But this is a decent comparison here. This is what I had to hunt with on the left back when I was a kid, and now the kids get to hunt with what's on the right. Both can do the job, but the kids nowadays have a little more breathing room to work with. A little bit more forgiving of a pattern for sure. So very interesting combo here to try out. I was really curious to see the true difference, and that just puts it on paper right there. I knew this was going to be the case, but that is as plain as day. We can obviously see the exact difference between these two now. So next up, we got to do the same test but in 3-inch and see if that trend continues, which I believe it will. So very interesting side by side for sure. And here are the two wads from those shells. You've got your Remington lead 6s on the left and your Viper TSS 9.5s on the right. Little different wad design between the two, but they clearly both did their job just fine. So nothing out of the ordinary to take note of here. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about that comparison right there? Definitely some interesting results. I think we all knew this is about what we were going to see. I don't think it's too surprising. However, that really shows the side-by-side difference from lead to TSS in a 410. These are just 2.5-inch loads as well. We're going to run this test in 3-inch with some 3-inch 7.5s probably and some TSS 9s. And I think we're probably going to see a pretty similar result to this from that combo, but this is what I was limited to when I was a kid. I know a lot of people are going to say, why would a 2.5-inch lead 410 load ever be considered for turkeys? Well, when you're a 7-year-old kid and your dad wants to get you the softest shooting shell he can off the store shelf and sets decoys up at 20 yards in front of you on the edge of a field, that's the kind of pattern you're working with here. It would certainly do the job, but you just have to know your absolute limitations and follow them. You can't try and push the bill, or else you may risk it and it might not actually turn out the way that you're hoping it does. But that's a perfect example right there. I had lead to work with, and the kids nowadays have the TSS option that I did not have. There's not a ton of 2.5-inch shells out there floating around for TSS, but there are certain companies that do make them, or other companies that will load custom ammunition for you in a 2.5-inch load. So if that's what you wanted to run for your young kid, you see the difference here. You can run a lead load, but it's limited. You got to be really careful with it. A TSS gives them a lot more breathing room to work with. And that's clearly the better option over here if you had the choice between these two. But leave all your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you done any testing like this where you compare a 410 lead and TSS side by side? Which one of these would you prefer to hunt with? It's probably going to be the TSS option, but have any of you ever hunted with a very limited lead 410 shell like that? And would any of you nowadays, if you're an adult, actually try and hunt with a combo like that just for the fun of it? You're going to have to get in tight on them for sure, but would you do it? Would you hunt with either one of these combos? And what other testing do you want to see me run through that old Pardner 410? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, you have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All the information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.